So this is a lecture on how the Cold War tensions ease and the effect that has on the world. So we're going to talk about de-Stalinization in the Soviet Union, détente in the United States, and kind of the last decade of the Cold War, the 1980s, Ronald Reagan and his Star Wars program. So in the 1950s and 60s, that's when the Cold War is at its peak. And Stalin had died in 53, and about 55, 56, Khrushchev becomes leader of the Soviet Union. He begins de-Stalinization, and he's literally going to purge the country of Stalin's memory. So he's the new leader in the Soviet Union, or the USSR, and he still has the same control of land and people. And after his secret speech where he criticizes Stalin, there is a anti-communist revolution in Hungary led by Imre Nagy, this guy right here, and they promise to form free elections. Khrushchev sends troops into Hungary, overpowered the protesters, captured Nagy, and then reasserts his control. And he basically is stating to the world, if you try to revolt against communist leadership, we're going to intervene in your international affairs. So as a way to kind of prove that he was tough, because he showed weakness in the secret speech and de-Stalinization, he sends missiles into Cuba. That leads to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which you'll study in depth next year. So because of the failures of the Soviet Union, the Cuban Missile Crisis, because the Soviets had to back down, Leonid Brezhnev, this guy right here, he takes over after Khrushchev. And Brezhnev is a reactionary. Brezhnev is very, very tough, very conservative. He limits human rights, he censors writers, and anybody who protests against him, he sends them into exile. And this period of reform in 1960 in Czechoslovakia, they try to loosen these restrictions on censorship, and this is in 1968. And this period of reform has come known as the Prague Spring. You hear it quite a bit. They call it the Arab Spring now, what's happening in 2012 and 2011. And the first time this kind of happened is in Prague in 68. And Brezhnev reacts the same way that Khrushchev did. They send in troops, and they state that Soviets have the right to prevent satellite states from rejecting communism. So they're not going to allow any European countries to kind of withdraw. So it's creating really a mass amount of tension, and you got to remember both sides have nuclear weapons, so you've got to be very careful. You can't antagonize any other side. Now, internationally, while Europe is kind of trying to rebel, the Chinese actually do rebel. They're resenting being the junior partners with the Soviet Union and communism. They don't want to be the little brother. So they begin to spread their own brand of communism in Africa and Asia, and the USSR gets very upset, and they don't share nuclear secrets, and they end technical and economic aid. And to this day, there's a very tense relationship between Russia and China. Then this guy happens, JFK. Here's John F. Kennedy, and then here's his vice president, LBJ. When he is killed, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, will become president. So the Bay of Pigs, which is a failed invasion in 1961 of Cuba, happens, where JFK tries to overthrow Castro. It fails. The Cuban Missile Crisis, we narrowly avoid nuclear war. This heightens the tension between the U.S. and the USSR. And after JFK is assassinated, Lyndon Baines Johnson assumes the presidency. And so they try to stop the spread of communism, and they really escalate the U.S. involvement in Vietnam to prevent the spread of communism. So he was actually sworn in on the plane after JFK was assassinated. So after you have this building up of tension, and Nixon, who becomes the president after Johnson, does something really unique. He does something called détente, which is kind of a relaxation of the tension. And Nixon was actually the first president ever to visit communist China. So they believed in realistic politics, that the U.S. would deal with the other nations in practical and flexible ways. And both sides agreed to pursue détente and reduce tensions. And so Nixon actually had a very good vision of the future. He realized that China was very important to U.S. because it's literally 1/4 of the world's population. So he relaxed the tension between the U.S. and China. It's called ping pong diplomacy. He actually sent an American ping pong team to play in China. It was in the movie Forrest Gump. So he signs the SALT Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitations Talks, and the 5-year agreement limiting the number of ICBM and sub-launched missiles. So he's really trying to ratchet down the tension. In the 1970s, after Nixon has to resign the presidency, you have this continuation of the relaxation, until this guy takes over right here. Reagan. Ronald Reagan is elected in 1979, becomes president in 1980, and there's tensions grow. Spelling right here. Let me fix that. So Ronald Reagan. Tensions grew as European and Asian countries began to develop their own nuclear arsenals, and when they have their own nuclear weapons, we kind of retreat from Bataan. I'm talking about India and Pakistan. So Reagan was a fierce anti-communist, and when he takes over, he is actually going to take away from Dayton, and he's going to increase the tension. So Reagan says we're going to stand up to communism. He actually makes a very famous speech, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall, talking about the Berlin Wall. And so you have Reagan on one side, on the other side you have Mikhail Gorbachev. Now Reagan, he wanted a program known as the Strategic Defensive Initiative to protect America against enemy missiles, enemy nuclear missiles. It was actually called Star Wars after he saw the movie, but it was never really put into effect. It's not feasible. The missiles just move too fast. So in 1985, this guy right here, Mikhail Gorbachev, he takes over. And actually, these two reforms that he does here, perestroika and glasnost, will lead to the fall of the Soviet Union. So over the course of the Cold War, you have kind of a buildup of tension in the 1950s and 60s, a relaxation in the 1970s, and then kind of a buildup again in the 1980s. All right.